The Grand Imperial Hotel glittered like a jewel in the heart of New York City. Crystal chandeliers rained golden light over a sea of tuxedos and silk gowns. The air was thick with the scent of white roses and expensive perfume, underscored by the soft strains of a string quartet playing a French waltz. Tonight was the opening gala for the Franco-American Trade and Diplomacy Conference, and every step of the marble floor echoed with quiet power. Amara Johnson moved quickly but carefully through the crowd, the black and white uniform of a hotel maid crisp against her deep brown skin. A silver tray balanced effortlessly on her hand, 6 flutes of champagne, chiming softly with each step. She kept her eyes lowered, skimming the edges of the crowd like a shadow, unseen, unnoticed. That was how she preferred it, or at least that was how she needed it. As she passed a cluster of foreign dignitaries near the grand staircase, a sharp voice sliced through the music. "Watch where you're going." The words cracked in the air like a whip. Amara froze mid-step. Standing in her path was Richard Collins, the hotel's general manager, a man whose tailored navy suit and slick-back hair were as polished as the disdain in his eyes. His voice carried, drawing the attention of the guests around them. "I swear every time I see you, you're about to ruin something," he said, his gaze flicking deliberately to the tray in her hand. "Do you have any idea what a bottle of this costs? Probably more than your monthly salary." A ripple of uncomfortable silence spread among the nearby guests. A French delegate, his champagne flute paused at his lips, glanced between Richard and Amara with a raised brow. Amara swallowed the heat rising in her chest. She knew the rules never embarrass a superior in front of guests, no matter how wrong they were. Especially Richard. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, keeping her voice steady. "It won't happen again." Richard's smirk deepened. "It had better not. People like you," he hesitated just long enough for the words to sting, "should be grateful to be here at all." The words landed heavy, each syllable laced with meaning that didn't need to be explained. Amara's fingers tightened around the tray's stem. She could feel eyes on her now, judging, pitying, curious. Her heart pounded, but her face stayed calm. If there was one thing she had mastered, it was the art of not giving them the reaction they wanted. "I'll keep that in mind," she said softly, dipping her head before moving past him. As she walked away, she caught the faint sound of whispers. A woman's voice. French hushed but clear, said "Elle est différente." She is different. Amara's lips twitched almost into a smile, but she forced it down. Not yet. Tonight wasn't the night to reveal anything, but soon. Amara slipped through the side corridor toward the staff service area, the muted hum of the gala fading behind her. Her tray was lighter now, the champagne flutes delivered, but the weight in her chest remained. She'd worked at the Grand Imperial long enough to know that Richard Collins didn't just dislike her, he needed her to fail. Every glare, every public jab was deliberate. And tonight, with the eyes of international delegates on the hotel, he was sharpening his knives. The staff lounge was empty except for Maria, a fellow maid, and one of the few people Amara trusted here. Maria's round face tightened with concern the moment she saw her. "What happened out there?" Maria whispered, stepping closer. I heard his voice from the kitchen. Amara gave a small shrug. "Same as always. He likes an audience." Maria's lips pressed into a thin line. "He's a snake, Amara. I wish you'd tell someone higher up." "That's not how I'm handling this," Amara said quietly. Her voice was calm, but inside her thoughts were running like clockwork, calculating, measuring. She wasn't here to complain. She was here to observe, to wait. Before Maria could reply, the door swung open and a tall woman in a shimmering silver gown stepped inside. She was clearly not staff. Her perfume announced her before her heels did. "Excuse me," the woman said, her accent lilting, unmistakably French. "Do you know where I might find the Rosewood Ballroom?" Amara straightened and offered a polite smile. "Of course, ma'am. If you follow the main hallway and take the second left, you'll see the sign. The Rosewood is just beyond the glass doors." The woman's eyes flickered with surprise at her clear, confident English. "Merci," she replied automatically. Without hesitation, Amara answered, "Je vous en prie, madame. Et profitez bien de la soirée." "You're very welcome, ma'am, and enjoy your evening." The woman's brows lifted and her lips curved into a knowing smile. Your French is perfect, she murmured, as if speaking to herself. She gave Amara a nod of respect before gliding back into the gala. Maria blinked at her. Since when do you speak French like that? Amara's mouth twitched. Since always. She didn't elaborate. She never did. From the hallway beyond, a burst of laughter rang out, Richard's voice mingling with a group of well-dressed men. Amara's spine straightened. She took a slow breath, letting the sound fade into the background. She had endured his condescension for weeks without slipping. She could endure it a little longer, because when the time came, Richard wouldn't just lose face, he'd lose everything. By the time Amara re-entered the main hall, the gala was in full swing. Waiters in crisp white jackets glided between the tables, refilling glasses and serving delicate hors d'oeuvres. Soft laughter and the low murmur of polished conversation blended with the music. She had barely taken 3 steps inside when Richard's voice cut through the air again. There she is, he said loudly to a cluster of guests, his tone dripping with mock relief. I was starting to think she'd gotten lost in the broom closet. The men around him chuckled, some politely, others with genuine amusement. Amara's eyes flicked toward them. Most were American investors she recognized from hotel briefings, though 1 or 2 wore the tailored elegance of European businessmen. She didn't break stride. Is there something you need, sir? She asked, her voice even. Richard tilted his head, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Yes, I need you to stay visible. When staff disappears, people start to think we're short-handed. His gaze dropped deliberately to her uniform, then back to her face. And appearances matter here. The subtext wasn't subtle. A few of the guests glanced at each other, sensing the edge in his words. One man cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. I understand, Amara replied, her tone neutral. She felt the weight of their stares, but she kept her movements precise as she stepped away to collect empty glasses from a nearby table. Richard wasn't finished. A few minutes later, as she passed near him again, he stopped her with a flick of his fingers. The French delegation is arriving soon, he said, voice pitched just loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. I want you stationed in the Rosewood Ballroom, right at the front. We can't afford mistakes tonight. Her eyes met his for a fraction of a second. She knew exactly what he was doing, setting her up for failure in front of the most high-profile guests of the evening. Of course, she said simply. Richard's smile widened, satisfied. Good. And try not to overcomplicate things. Just smile, pour the champagne, and let the real staff handle the rest. The word real landed like a stone. She turned without a word, moving toward the service hall. Her steps were steady, but inside she could feel the slow burn of heat in her chest. She'd dealt with men like Richard before, men who believed their position gave them the right to define another person's worth. He wanted her rattled. He wanted her to stumble in front of the French delegation so he could humiliate her beyond repair. Fine, let him try. As she slipped into the back hallway, she passed Maria, who gave her a questioning look. Amara just shook her head. Rosewood Ballroom. She murmured the corner of her mouth, lifting in something that wasn't quite a smile. Maria frowned. That's where the VIPs will be. I know, Amara said, and that was exactly where she needed to be. The Rosewood Ballroom was a masterpiece of quiet opulence, walls lined with gold leaf paneling, towering mirrors, reflecting the glow of crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Manhattan skyline. Tables dressed in ivory linen stood ready for the evening's most important guests. Amara slipped inside through the side entrance, adjusting the silver tray on her palm. The room was still empty, except for 2 men standing near the grand piano, their voices low, but carrying just enough in the quiet space. She froze, half hidden behind one of the massive floral arrangements. Chaudier. Once this conference is over, Richard's voice said, smooth with confidence, we'll be bringing in a new team. Fresh faces. People who match the image this hotel should project. The other man, tall, silver-haired, with the tailored ease of an investor, nodded. And the current staff? Richard gave a dismissive laugh. Most of them will be gone by next month, especially the ones who don't fit the standard. I've already got replacements lined up. No one will question it. Amara's stomach tightened. She could hear the smile in his voice, the satisfaction in stripping people of their livelihoods as if it were nothing. The investor sipped his drink. The board might ask questions. Not if I deliver tonight, Richard replied. The French delegation is a big deal. I make them happy, the board will give me full control over staffing. He paused, lowering his voice just slightly. And if a few mistakes happen under the wrong person's watch, well, that just makes my case stronger. Amara's grip on the tray tightened until her knuckles ached. She didn't need him to name names, she knew exactly who the wrong person was. The men moved toward the far exit, still talking in low tones. As soon as they were gone, Amara exhaled slowly, forcing her shoulders to relax. This wasn't just about him being petty or cruel. He was playing a bigger game, one that could cost dozens of her colleagues their jobs, including hers. She stepped into the center of the ballroom, scanning the polished silverware and perfectly aligned glasses. Every detail was flawless, but she could almost feel Richard's plan hanging in the air like a trap. Her gaze drifted to the double doors where the French delegation would enter. She imagined the moment Richard was hoping for her, fumbling, spilling champagne, forgetting some detail in front of the most influential guests of the night. It wouldn't happen, not tonight, because she had her own plan, and whether Richard knew it or not, every step he forced her to take was bringing her closer to the moment she'd been waiting for. The buzz of conversation swelled as the first wave of guests entered the Rosewood Ballroom. Amara moved between tables with quiet efficiency, offering champagne flutes and subtle smiles. Her posture was perfect, shoulders, back chin level, just as she'd been taught years ago in an entirely different life. Near the grand entrance, a small group of French delegates gathered, their tailored suits and elegant dresses radiating understated wealth. They were speaking rapidly in French, the words rolling over each other like quicksilver. One of the delegates, a man in his 60s with a neatly trimmed beard, looked around the room with faint confusion. Excusez-moi, he said to no one in particular. Où sont les ascenseurs privés? No one nearby seemed to understand. The man's question hung awkwardly in the air until his eyes found Amara. She stepped forward smoothly. The private elevators are just past the marble columns, sir, she said in English, her tone polite but confident. Then in flawless French, she added, Si vous le souhaitez, je peux vous y conduire moi-même. If you'd like, I can escort you there myself. The man's eyebrows lifted in pleasant surprise. Parfait français, he said warmly, his gaze sharpening with interest. Et un accent impeccable. Où avez-vous appris? Amara offered a small practiced smile. Un peu partout, she replied lightly. A little bit everywhere. Before he could press further, she gestured toward the elevators, walking with him for a few steps before returning to her post. From across the room, she caught the flicker of Richard's expression, narrowed eyes, a tightening of his jaw. He had heard. Good. She moved on, refilling glasses, her senses tuned to the undercurrent in the room. Whispers traveled fast here. The French delegate had already rejoined his group, and she could feel their glances drifting toward her every so often. At one table, a young American woman in a sleek black gown leaned toward her companion and murmured, Did you hear her? That was, not tourist French. The companion nodded. Who is she? Amara pretended not to hear her, focus on balancing the tray as she approached a pair of guests at the far end. But inside there was a spark, quiet thrill. The first seed had been planted. Richard, of course, was quick to react. As she passed the service station, he appeared at her side, his voice low and sharp. Since when do you speak French? Since a while, she answered evenly. He gave her a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Careful. The guests might start thinking you're more important than you are. She met his gaze for a beat longer than necessary, then moved on without a word. Let him stew. The ballroom's hum softened as the main course service began, giving Amara a brief window to slip into the staff corridor. She set her tray on the stainless steel counter and stretched her fingers, the faint clink of silverware echoing from the kitchen beyond. Maria appeared a moment later, a folded napkin in her hand and a look that said she'd been waiting for this moment. She glanced over her shoulder before stepping closer. I heard you speaking French out there, she whispered. Half the room did. Amara tilted her head, pretending it was nothing. It came in handy. Maria's voice dropped even lower. Richard didn't like it. That's fine, Amara replied, her tone cool. But Maria wasn't done. She pulled a phone from her apron pocket, the screen glowing faintly. I need to show you something. It was a grainy photo, Richard standing too close to a tall, well-dressed man in a dimly lit bar. The timestamp was from last month, and the man was unmistakably Victor Lang, a hotel supplier who'd been blacklisted by several chains for fraud. I caught this on my break, Maria explained. Didn't think much of it until tonight when I saw Lang in the lobby talking to him again. Amara's eyes narrowed. This was the kind of connection that could ruin Richard if handled correctly. Thank you, she said softly, meaning it. Maria hesitated. You're not just a maid, are you? Amara gave the faintest of smiles. Let's just say, I've worn other uniforms before. Before Maria could press for more, a burst of laughter from the main hall pulled them back to the present. Amara picked up her tray again. As she turned to leave, Maria caught her arm. If you're going to take him down, I'm in. Whatever you need. Amara studied her for a moment, then nodded. I'll remember that. Back in the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted. The French delegation was now fully seated, and Richard was making a point of hovering near them, laughing too loudly at their jokes. His eyes flicked toward Amara, more than once calculating. She pretended not to notice, but inside the game board was forming in her mind. And now she wasn't playing alone. By the time dessert service began, Richard had positioned himself like a conductor, directing the staff's every move from the center of the ballroom. His voice was sharp, but smiling just loud enough for guests to hear authority wrapped in civility. Amara returned from the kitchen carrying a tray of crème brûlée, the sugar tops still warm and glistening under the chandeliers. As she moved toward the French delegation's table, Richard intercepted her. Perfect, he said, with the brightness that didn't reach his eyes. You'll serve table 1. Make sure to impress them. Table 1 wasn't just any table. It was the French ambassador, 2 senior trade ministers, and the billionaire CEO of a European luxury brand. The kind of guests who could make or break reputations. Richard leaned in slightly, his voice dropping so only she could hear. Don't screw this up. Amara's expression remained neutral. Of course, sir. As she approached the table, she felt the weight of at least a dozen gazes on her, Richard's among them. She began serving from the ambassador's right, steady and precise. Her movements were elegant, each plate placed with care. Then halfway around the table it happened. A man in a charcoal suit shifted suddenly, his elbow knocking into the tray. One of the plates teetered, the caramelized sugar cracking slightly. Gasps rippled through the nearby guests. Amara's reflexes took over. She caught the plate with her free hand, steadying the tray without spilling a single crumb. Pardonnez-moi, monsieur, she said in flawless French, her tone warm but unshaken. Aucun dommage. Votre dessert est intact. My apologies, sir. No damage done. Your dessert is intact. The man blinked, then chuckled, clearly charmed. Vous parlez magnifiquement bien. As she continued serving, the conversation at the table shifted. The ambassador leaned toward her. Where did you learn French? He asked, curiosity plain in his tone. Amara smiled politely. A little here, a little there. Richard, watching from across the room, didn't smile at all. His jaw was tight, his eyes following her every move. When she returned to the service station, he was waiting. Lucky save, he said flatly. Next time, maybe don't tempt fate. But the tension in his voice told her it hadn't been luck. It had been a loss for him. He'd wanted her to stumble, and instead she'd earned the kind of attention he couldn't control. And that, she thought, as she moved back into the flow of the gala, was exactly what she needed. The evening's tempo slowed as guests moved into casual conversation, coffee and after-dinner drinks. Waiters began circulating with fresh champagne and digestifs. Amara scanned the ballroom from her position near the service station, her mind quietly mapping out the next move. Across the room, she spotted a moment of opportunity. At the far side of the ambassador's table, a tall, elegant woman in an emerald gown, one of the French trade ministers, shifted suddenly, a look of mild panic crossing her face. A dark splash spread across the silk near her hip. Amara was moving before anyone else noticed. She crossed the space swiftly, but without drawing attention, her steps sure, her presence calm. Madame, she said softly in French, kneeling beside the woman. Permettez-moi. Allow me. From the pocket of her apron, Amara produced a small bottle of club soda and a folded white napkin. She treated the spill quickly and expertly, the movements practiced and precise. Within seconds, the stain was barely visible, and the minister's shoulders relaxed. Incroyable, the woman breathed, genuinely impressed. Vous avez sauvé ma robe. You've saved my dress. Amara smiled, standing gracefully. It's my pleasure, madame. Enjoy the rest of your evening. The exchange drew the attention of others at the table. The ambassador, watching closely, gave her a small nod of approval. The billionaire CEO beside him smiled faintly, curiosity glinting in his eyes. As Amara returned to the service station, she could feel the shift in the air. People had noticed her not as the maid Richard wanted them to see, but as someone competent, poised, and worthy of respect. Richard noticed too. He stepped into her path, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. You're making a lot of noise tonight, he said. I'm just doing my job, she replied evenly. His eyes narrowed. Stay in your lane, Johnson. Don't start thinking these people are your friends. Amara met his gaze, her expression calm but unyielding. Understood. But as she turned away, the corners of her mouth lifted. Every interaction tonight was stacking the deck in her favor. The French delegation now had a personal reason to remember her, and when the right moment came, that memory would matter. She just had to wait for Richard to push one step too far. The ballroom had taken on a different energy, brighter, sharper, as if every laugh and clink of glass carried an undercurrent of tension. Amara could feel it in the way Richard moved. He was no longer lingering casually. He was circling, scanning the room, like a predator that had just caught the scent of prey. From her position near the back, she watched him approach the French ambassador's table, for the third time in as many minutes, bending low to whisper something that made the billionaire CEO glance toward her. The look wasn't hostile, but it was assessing, like she was now a subject of conversation. Maria slid past her, refilling water glasses. He's wound up, she muttered under her breath. He's planning something. You can see it all over his face. Amara didn't need the warning, she already knew. The way Richard's jaw flexed each time their eyes met told her he wasn't going to wait for a small mistake. He was going to create one. The pressure mounted when the hotel's events coordinator approached her. Richard wants you to handle the champagne service for the closing toast, the woman said, avoiding eye contact, as if she already knew this was a setup. All 12 VIP tables, alone. Amara nodded slowly. Of course. The coordinator hesitated, then whispered, good luck, before hurrying away. In the corner of the ballroom, Richard was speaking with one of the bartenders, gesturing toward the service station. When the bartender glanced at Amara with a flicker of discomfort, she knew he'd planted something. She didn't know what, but it didn't matter. Whatever he thought would break her tonight, she'd turn it into a weapon. As the speeches began, Amara slipped into the kitchen for the champagne. Her hands were steady as she inspected each bottle, each glass. Nothing was out of place until she reached the final tray. One of the flutes had a faint oily smear on the rim, invisible unless you were looking for it. If she'd served it, the guest might have made a scene. She switched the glass without a second thought, her movements unhurried, and returned to the ballroom. The applause swelled as the final speaker, the French ambassador, raised his hands for silence. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, smiling warmly. A toast to the partnership between our nations and to the hospitality we have enjoyed tonight. All eyes turned toward Amara as she stepped forward, tray in hand. Richard was watching from the far side of the room, his smile a mask for the storm brewing in his eyes. She moved from table to table, her French precise and elegant as she offered each glass. By the time she reached the ambassador's table, the room had gone utterly still, as if even the air was waiting for something to happen. Amara smiled, her gaze sweeping the guests. The real show hadn't even begun yet, but Richard didn't know that. The ambassador's toast concluded with a round of warm applause. Glasses clinked and the hum of conversation returned, lighter, now buoyed by champagne. Amara moved toward the service station to return her tray, her steps measured. She had almost reached the door when Richard's voice rang out, slicing through the air like a blade. Johnson. The room quieted just enough for his words to carry. He was standing near the center, surrounded by a small group of VIP guests, the French ambassador among them. His smile was tight, performative. Why don't you join us for a moment, he said, beckoning her forward. Our distinguished guests would like to see the diverse talent we have working here." It wasn't an invitation, it was a command dressed up for the crowd. Every step toward him felt deliberate, a performance in itself. She stopped just short of the circle, her tray balanced effortlessly on her palm. Richard gestured to the ambassador. "Amara here has been serving you all evening. Isn't it amazing how quickly she's learned her role? Before this, I doubt she'd ever been in a room like this." Maid. A few polite chuckles. The ambassador's brows drew together slightly. Richard wasn't finished. In fact, he said, voice dropping into that faux-friendly register that always signaled cruelty, "I think it's safe to say she's a long way from home. This is probably the fanciest night of her life." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. Amara's gaze swept the circle, faces shifting between polite discomfort and thinly veiled interest. Richard was trying to box her in to make her small in front of the most important people in the room. And then he made his mistake. "You know," Richard continued, "people like her don't usually get this close to royalty unless they're cleaning up after them." The air froze. A murmur ran through the group, the ambassador's expression hardening. Somewhere near the back, Maria's hand went to her mouth. Amara set the tray down on the nearest table. Her pulse was steady. The moment had arrived. She stepped into the circle, her posture tall, her voice calm but caring. "Mr. Collins," she said, "I think there's something you and our guests should know." Richard's smirk faltered. This isn't the... But she was already turning toward the ambassador, switching seamlessly into perfect French. "Monsieur l'ambassadeur, permettez-moi de me présenter correctement. Je suis Amara Johnson, fille du conseiller principal du commerce entre les États-Unis et la France, et actionnaire minoritaire de la chaîne Grand Impérial." The words landed like a crack of thunder. "I am Amara Johnson, daughter of the senior U.S. French trade advisor and a minority shareholder of the Grand Imperial chain." Gasps rippled through the group. The ambassador's eyes widened in recognition, a slow smile spreading across his face. Amara reached into her pocket and pulled out a sleek black envelope. And in case there's any doubt, she continued in English, her voice still cool. "This is my authorization from the board to review all operations during the conference." She handed it to the ambassador, who opened it and scanned the document before nodding gravely. "This is legitimate." Richard's face had gone pale. Amara turned to him, her voice still level. "So, yes, Mr. Collins, this is not my first time in a room like this, but it might be your last." The surrounding guests exchanged murmurs, the balance of the room tilting in an instant. For a heartbeat, the ballroom was silent, so still that the faint hum of the chandeliers seemed louder than the crowd. Then the murmurs began. Shareholder, did she say advisor's daughter, perfect French? The questions rippled outward, moving from table to table, like the spreading rings of a stone dropped into still water. The French delegation was the first to respond. The ambassador stepped forward, taking Amara's hand warmly. "Mademoiselle Johnson," he said in French, his voice carrying enough for everyone nearby to hear, "it is an honor. I have known your father for many years. Why did you not announce yourself earlier?" Amara's smile was polite, but her eyes stayed on Richard. "I was here to observe. Sometimes the best way to see how an establishment is truly run is from the inside." A ripple of sharp interest passed through the circle of guests. Richard's jaw tightened. This is some kind of stunt?" he said quickly. "She's exaggerating. Exaggerating." The billionaire CEO cut in his tone, cool. "Collins, I've met her father. I recognize the resemblance now. And if she has board authorization, that makes her your superior." The ambassador unfolded the black envelope again, holding the document up. "It is exactly as she said. Authorization for operational review signed by the chairwoman herself." Gasps gave way to low, knowing murmurs. Several of the hotel's investors had appeared at the edges of the crowd, drawn by the tension. Their expressions were not friendly toward Richard. Amara took a small step closer to him, her voice dropping just enough to be intimate and lethal. "You've spent weeks trying to humiliate me, Richard. Tonight you succeeded only in humiliating yourself." His face flushed, but she didn't stop. "I have records," she continued louder now, "of unauthorized meetings with Victor Lang, a supplier banned for fraud. Photos, timestamps, witnesses. I also have evidence of funds missing from the maintenance budget. The crowd shifted. Several people whispered the words, embezzlement and audit, threading through the air. Richard tried to laugh, but it came out thin. You can't prove. Maria's voice rang out from behind the crowd. I can, and I will. All eyes turned as she stepped forward, phone in hand, pulling up the photo she'd shown Amara earlier. The screen glowed the image clear enough for the nearest guests to see. Richard's hands curled into fists. You don't know what you're talking about. The ambassador's voice cut through cold and sharp now. I suggest you remain silent, Mr. Collins. I will be speaking with the board personally before the night is over. The billionaire CEO nodded toward Amara. And I suggest the rest of us get used to taking our instructions from Ms. Johnson. The room's energy shifted completely. People who had been watching from a distance now approached Amara, directly introducing themselves, offering congratulations, speaking to her in French, English, and even a bit of Spanish. Richard was no longer the center of the room. He was shrinking, his authority dissolving with every passing second. Amara met his gaze one last time. This is what happens, she said softly, when you mistake dignity for weakness. And then she turned away, letting the crowd swallow her. Her voice blending into the warm hum of French and English as the balance of power settled firmly, irrevocably in her hands. By the time dessert plates were cleared, Richard Collins was no longer acting like the man in charge. He stood rigid at the far side of the ballroom, avoiding eye contact, his once confident smile reduced to a tight, brittle line. Two board members, both in sharp suits and equally sharp expressions, had cornered him near the service doors. Their conversation was brief, the gestures clipped and unmistakable. This was not a negotiation. Amara remained near the French delegation, speaking quietly with the ambassador. She could feel the shift in the room, with every passing minute staff moving more freely, guests gravitating toward her instead of Richard. Conversations turning warm again. The tension was dissolving, but only for everyone else. For Richard, the walls were closing in. The board members finished with him and crossed the room toward Amara. One of them, a tall woman with silver hair, extended her hand. Ms. Johnson, she said, her tone respectful. We've confirmed your authorization. Effective immediately, you are the acting operations lead for the remainder of this conference. Mr. Collins is relieved of his duties pending investigation. Amara shook her hand, her voice calm but firm. Thank you. I'll ensure the remainder of the event reflects the Grand Imperial's highest standards. The woman's gaze softened just slightly. We'll be in touch tomorrow morning to discuss next steps. Across the room, Richard's shoulders sagged. Security approached discreetly, one of the guards murmuring something in his ear. His face flushed deep red as he was escorted toward the staff corridor. A few guests pretended not to watch. Most didn't bother. Maria appeared at Amara's side, grinning. That was incredible. Amara's lips curved into a small smile. It was necessary. She didn't raise her voice, but the instructions she gave next carried through the staff like a ripple. Double-check all service stations. Make sure our guests have everything they need. And bring fresh champagne to table 1. Maria's eyes sparkled. Right away, Ms. Johnson. The title wasn't official, not yet, but it felt right. As the night wore on, Amara moved through the ballroom with the ease of someone who belonged there. She spoke to guests in their native languages, remembered small details from earlier conversations, and coordinated staff with precision. The French ambassador toasted her privately at his table, lifting his glass in her direction. To dignity, he said in English, and to those who defend it. She clinked her glass gently against his. To truth, she replied. Across the city skyline, the lights of Manhattan glowed like a million watchful eyes. Inside the Grand Imperial, the woman Richard had tried to diminish was now running the show and doing it flawlessly. The game was over, and Amara had won. By the next morning, the Grand Imperial was no longer the same place it had been just 24 hours earlier. The air in the lobby felt lighter, conversations between staff were no longer hushed, and the name Richard Collins was spoken only in passing, and usually in a lowered voice. Amara stood at the concierge desk reviewing the day's schedule. A few paces away, Maria was fielding calls from the press. The story had broken before sunrise, Hotel manager removed after public confrontation with shareholder at Franco-American Gala. Several outlets had already picked up the footage, grainy cell phone videos from guests who had recorded the moment she spoke in perfect French. One clip showing the ambassador taking her hand was replaying on loop across morning news segments. "Phone's been ringing non-stop," Maria said, covering the receiver for a moment. "Half the calls are from journalists, the other half from people congratulating you." Amara didn't look up from the papers in front of her. "And the board, they're impressed," Maria said with a grin. "One of them's even calling you the calm storm." A group of housekeeping staff walked past, their heads high. They nodded at Amara, some offering quiet thanks. It struck her that this was bigger than just removing Richard. It was about showing the entire staff that dignity and professionalism could outlast arrogance and cruelty. By mid-morning, a representative from the board arrived with formal documents placing her as acting director of operations for the remainder of the conference. It wasn't permanent, but it was official enough for the staff to start using Ms. Johnson without hesitation. Later, as she stepped into the Rosewood Ballroom to check preparations for a luncheon, she noticed a small crowd gathered near the windows. The French ambassador was there again, speaking with a pair of American trade officials. When he spotted her, he beckoned her over. "Ms. Johnson," he said warmly, switching to French for the benefit of the others. "I have told my colleagues about you. They are very eager to meet the woman who handled last night with such poise." One of the Americans, a woman in a sharp navy suit, extended her hand. "You should know, Ms. Johnson, that the State Department was quite impressed. You have a rare talent for reading a room." Amara accepted the compliment with a polite smile, though inside she was already thinking ahead. She wasn't here for accolades. She was here to make sure the changes she'd started would last. By afternoon, Richard's dismissal had been made public. The official statement cited administrative misconduct, but the rumors circulating among the staff were far less polite. The maintenance budget irregularities were now under formal audit, and the connection to Victor Lang was being investigated by legal counsel. As evening approached, Amara finally allowed herself a moment alone in her temporary office. The city skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, glowing against the deepening blue of twilight. She leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. There was still work to be done. Meetings to arrange staff morale to rebuild, but for the first time in weeks, she felt the weight shift off her shoulders. She had defended herself without losing her composure, exposed corruption without shouting, and reminded everyone in the room last night that quiet strength was still strength. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. Maria peeked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this." Amara took one, smiling faintly. "Thanks. For more than just the coffee." Maria shrugged, grinning. "You saved the hotel. Least I could do is keep you caffeinated." 2 weeks later, the Grand Imperial felt like a different hotel. The lingering tension that once hung in the corridors had been replaced by an energy Amara hadn't seen in years, a quiet confidence in the way the staff carried themselves, and a renewed pride in their work. Standing at the head of the Rosewood Ballroom during a morning meeting, Amara surveyed the group. Housekeepers in fresh uniforms, servers lined up with trays at their sides, concierge staff in sharp suits. Every eye was on her. First, she began, her voice steady but warm. "I want to thank you all, not just for your professionalism during the conference, but for standing tall through weeks, months of being undervalued. That ends now." A ripple of nods and murmurs spread through the room. She moved to the next point on her list. Effective immediately, the Grand Imperial will implement a diversity and inclusion policy for all hiring and promotions. No one will be judged by the color of their skin, their accent, or where they come from. Maria, standing at the back, grinned and gave a discreet thumbs up. "We're also launching a professional development program," Amara continued. "Language courses, management training, mentorship. If you want to move up, we'll give you the tools to do it. And yes, these will be on paid company time." A few gasps of surprise. Someone in the middle row started clapping before quickly stopping, unsure if it was appropriate, until the rest of the staff joined in. After the meeting, Amara walked the halls speaking to employees individually. In the kitchen, she asked the sous chef about his ideas for the new seasonal menu. In housekeeping, she listened as two junior staff suggested ways to streamline supply requests. She wrote everything down. That afternoon, she met with the board in the executive lounge. They had questions about budgets, about guest satisfaction, about staff turnover. She had answers backed by numbers and the personal testimonies she'd collected from employees over the past 2 weeks. By the end of the meeting, the board voted unanimously to make her position permanent Director of Operations, Grand Imperial Hotel, New York. She signed the paperwork without ceremony, though her hand tightened just slightly on the pen. Not from nerves, from resolve. That evening, she stood at the marble reception desk as guests checked in. A young bellhop approached, eyes wide. "Ms. Johnson," he said, "is it true we're going to have free evening classes? I've always wanted to learn French." Amara smiled. "Yes, and I expect you to be my best student." As she watched him walk away, she felt the truth settle over her. The Grand Imperial was no longer just a place where she worked. It was a place she had changed. Not with fury, not with vengeance, but with the quiet power of someone who knew exactly who she was. Spring sunlight spilled through the glass facade of the Grand Imperial, casting golden patterns across the marble floor. The lobby buzzed with a gentle, steady rhythm, guests checking in, staff moving with quiet confidence, the scent of fresh lilies perfuming the air. Amara stepped out of the elevator, her tailored navy dress and subtle gold jewelry. A far cry from the maid's uniform she'd worn just months earlier. The concierge greeted her with a warm, "Good morning, Ms. Johnson," and she returned the smile. It was her first official day as Director of Operations under the new contract. The title carried weight, but she wore it lightly, like it had always belonged to her. As she crossed the lobby, she spotted a familiar figure near the entrance. Luc Moreau, the billionaire CEO from the French delegation, stood with a leather briefcase in one hand, a faint smile playing on his lips. Amara, he greeted, his accent soft but unmistakable. "I was hoping I'd catch you." She raised an eyebrow. "Checking in again. We'll have to start giving you the frequent guest discount." He chuckled. "Actually, I'm here to invite you to Paris. There's a hospitality summit next month, and I think the Grand Imperial should be represented by the woman who, stole the show." Her lips curved. "I'll think about it." Luke's gaze held hers for a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Do. And maybe while you're there, I could show you the best cafes in Montmartre." She didn't answer right away, just allowed herself the smallest smile, the kind that left questions hanging in the air. "We'll see, Monsieur Moreau." A group of arriving guests swept between them, and when the moment broke, Luke gave her a respectful nod before heading toward the revolving doors. Maria appeared at Amara's side, watching him leave. "Is it just me?" she said with a grin. "Or was that not entirely business?" Amara laughed softly. "Some things don't need to be defined right away." They moved toward the reception desk together, where a new hire was struggling to process a complicated booking. Amara stepped in, guiding the trainee through the system with calm patience. When the transaction was complete, the guest left smiling, and the trainee exhaled in relief. "Thank you, Ms. Johnson," the young woman said. "Anytime," Amara replied, and meant it. As the afternoon light deepened, Amara paused near the lobby windows, looking out at the city she had fought to stand tall in. Richard was gone, the culture was changing, and the Grand Imperial was thriving. But more than that, she had proved to herself that strength could be quiet, revenge could be graceful, and healing could happen in the very place where you were once underestimated. She picked up her planner and moved toward the elevators, ready for whatever came next. And somewhere in the back of her mind, the scent of Paris lingered, warm croissants, cobblestone streets, and maybe, just maybe, a conversation over coffee with a certain Frenchman.